Hi, folks. You'll realize it's Friday because we're all wearing our hats. I've got Stuart Lockhead with me and Jimmy Hutton.
Hello there.
Stuart. We'll go with the presser because there was quite a lot in it. There was quite a lot of information imparted, and there's a few things I think we need to talk about just to make sure we understand them. And I think we might have a wee chat about how to move goalposts when it comes to the franchise
I know
for
what you mean.
the independence referendum.
Nolly, we got to ask, the viewers are going to wonder why you're wearing that T-shirt.
This T-shirt was after the independence referendum.
Oh, so you were proud.
Yes, I'm one of the 45. Well, now that I'm one of the 55, I thought I'd better give it a final airing before I throw it on the bonfire.
No. I think that you should make an offer on camera and on the mic to see if there's anybody that wants to swap their 55 T-shirt for yours.
Any unionists with a 55 T-shirt want to do a swap?
Exactly. You never know who's watching.
I'll maybe tweet
bugger
that.
You'll end up wearing some red, white and blue nonsense that could be better served taking it to back green and burnt.
I have no colour bias, Jimmy. It's the way you put the colours together that's important, not the colours themselves.
I'm still looking for corks for my genuine Australian hat.
Well, there's plastic corks out there. Just use fly spray.
I'm talking about using it as a prop, not to keep the flies off.
Well, I know, but the corks were supposed to keep flies off, weren't they? Okay, guys, okay. Enough of this pointless banter.
Tomfoolery.
The presser today. Stuart, before we even got to the presser, you had a wee heart attack to yourself about the introduction to the presser.
Yes, I think we better start looking out for any possible pattern of behaviour by the BBC, bearing in mind how biased Brewer's programme was this week. We had a very biased introduction by the presenter, who normally reads the news, so that's a double barrel thing. When she first started speaking, she said the Scottish Government is coming under pressure over its virus response. She said there were all these outbreaks in schools. And she implied that, which I don't think the First Minister would agree with if she was asked a question about that the outbreaks aren't in schools, but they affect schools. She then, this is the presenter, BBC presenter, she then said there were problems with the furlough coming to an end, there were problems with the quarantine changes, and that Scotland had a stricter quarantine rule. Whatever the word is. Anyway, no, I don't think Scotland is any stricter on the quarantining people coming back from abroad, and I think, to be honest, the furlough coming to an end is a British government problem, not a Scottish government problem. So I think that's a bit, the entire introduction was biased.
Well, I mean, because it's a public health issue, can Scotland differentiate from the rest of the country about what countries they insist on quarantining?
The presenter, well, that's true, but the presenter suggested that the Scottish Government is coming under pressure on its virus response, and then came these three different items underneath to prove that her point.
So there's not been an outbreak in a school yet?
No.
Is that right? Or what was the 6 teacher one about? Was there not 6 teachers?
Again, that's, at the moment, I believe it's isolated. The First Minister didn't mention it. I mean, I think it's a centre for people with learning disabilities or disabled.
But that, I mean, this is an age-old problem for the BBC and the reporters. They seem incapable of understanding what the devolution settlement says. What remains as part of the British government's remit seems irrelevant to them. If it's a problem, it's a Scottish government problem, regardless of whether they've got the power to sort it. I mean, it's been ongoing for years.
All I'm saying is I'm going to keep an eye on this.
Well, I mean, the other point is worth mentioning that at a general election, all they talk about in Scotland is what is devolved. You know, they fight a general election on education and health. When it comes to the Holyrood elections, all they talk about is things that aren't devolved. You know, we want you to solve this problem because you don't have the power to solve the problem.
It's the easiest way for the unions to go.
Yeah, because they know there's nothing the Scottish Government can do about devolved issues.
Absolutely.
Which is the one that got me yesterday that I think she kind of missed a trick with was, you know, closing the English border. She doesn't have the power.
Was that Willie Rennie's question?
Yeah, I mean, she could shut down Scotland, but she can't shut the English border any more than she can shut the border at Calais.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. We're today. What we're up to? How many new? We had 71 new cases today. Yesterday it was 77 new cases, and apparently that was the highest daily number of new infections since May. So by this time next week, we could be looking at a different situation. But it's not a question of Scotland becoming worse than England overall. I don't think the question of the border, English-Scottish border, is going to come up in the immediate future.
Statistically, the number of outbreaks in Scotland are still less per head of population than south of the border. But anybody that thinks they're going to close the English border, you know, it's not going to happen.
Well, I looked at the figures before yesterday's figures. Yesterday's figures were 77 new infections in Scotland. The England figures were 1,050. So you multiply the 77 by 10%, you get to 770. That's not a huge factor.
No, and I mean, okay, they're not gonna put England back in the lockdown. That's just, it's not gonna happen. So, you know, it'll be done regionally, and perhaps they'll get good enough that they can drill it down to individual businesses or households eventually.
There is one statistic that we can be optimistic about, and I think it's across the whole of the UK. The number of deaths is maintaining very low.
Yeah, I think it was Newsnight had quite a good piece on that. Remember, we asked the question: is the management of the actual illness now much better? And what they were actually saying is no, because they don't have any different tools than they had in day one. So because I was thinking, you know, there are a lot less deaths. Are they managing to keep people out of ICU? But apparently they're not claiming that at all.
No, or we're just getting to the point where the weakest have died off.
Yeah, I think that was.
We're now at the point where people are managing to fight it off because
the
people that have gone are the people who couldn't fight it off.
Well, funnily enough, Radio 4, I'm a big fan of Radio 4, I have to say. They had an expert on there that basically said that, you know, we've culled the weakest.
Aye, it's maybe an unpalatable truth, but it probably is the truth.
Yeah. We should be thinking, talking about that, we could be looking at a totally different situation by this time next week in Scotland with this factory. I mean, 1,200 workers plus 300 agency workers working in other factories as well as working in the main factory. And possibly, the First Minister said there could be thousands in quarantine, in social isolation as a result of this outbreak.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to have to do if we want to keep schools open.
It's one way to keep
the economy turning over. Sorry, Jimmy.
Sorry, I'm just saying it's one way to keep Fifers and Dundonians in the house.
No. Very nice people in Fife.
Absolutely.
Jimmy, did you pick up on anything in particular in the presser?
Not really, mate. I find it a bit droll today. It always is when that chief nurse is on. I find her and Fiona Hislop actually pretty dull. So
aye, they're quite difficult to understand, aren't they?
Aye, I took one look at it the day and thought, oh no, here we go. It's like going to an Arnold Brown gig or something. You know, you've got to work for every line.
Oh no, he's brilliant in Red Dwarf.
So,
out of context, you're right there, Jimmy. I think it was worth one other thing the First Minister wanted to point out. There was a clear difference between the way they're dealing with the factory outbreak and the Aberdeen many pubs outbreak. And I don't really, it's self-explanatory. I've said it in the summing it up, haven't I?
Aye,
Yeah.
aye, it's a factory, so they know they can get right in about the staff. They've got a list of everybody that works there, a list of everybody that lives in the houses with the people that work there. So straight away, the incident management team and the test and protect people can get right in about that.
I think we should change the language around this. I think we should stop talking about isolation and quarantine and start talking about enforced holidays. I'm really sorry, but you and your family are going to have to go on a 2-week enforced holiday.
House arrests.
For the good of the country.
No,
if we turn it into a sort of cheerier phraseology, you know,
the minute
you're not isolated, you're going on holiday.
Aye, but the minute you tell Dundonians they're going on holiday, they're not staying in the house, mate. They're digging out them swimming costumes that their granny knitted them 40 years ago and they're headed to the beach.
Jimmy, did you get beaten up by a Dundonian when you were young?
No. I just, I've never spent much time there, mate. It's one of these places that tend to pass through more than anything.
They've got fantastic pubs. They've still got real pubs up there. Pubs my granda would recognise.
All right. Well, coming back to the presser before you move on, because I'm sure you're just about to. Coming back to the Chief Nursing Officer and Cabinet Secretary for the Economy, Fiona Hislop. I must admit, I thought when Fiona Hislop made her re-announcement, it was one of these very dry. It was an announcement that governments always regularly make, and it was just slotted in today. It was almost like out of place.
Well,
could have been made individually by Fiona Hislop standing on whatever they do it to the press anyway.
I don't think she needs to be there.
Anything to do with COVID, they're doing the announcements at the pressers, aren't they?
It was Padding. Nicola's sick and tired of talking to these clowns. She wanted to get Hislop to waste 10 minutes.
Could be right there. I could be right there. I agree with you there, Jimmy.
So are we going to run a book and see if Aberdeen's getting out of lockdown on Sunday or not?
That's a fair question. She sounded optimistic, didn't she?
Well, they're just setting up the timeline on Sunday. It'll be Wednesday before they actually make any.
I had to explain to my wife why I wasn't in the least bit surprised that Aberdeen Council wasn't backing the government's position.
They're not normal. That's why the people who have been elected to council in Aberdeen are just abnormal. They're some kind of weird aliens who think it's perfectly okay to...
He's really on the day, isn't he, Jimmy?
Well, they are, man. Come on. Where else in the country do you get suspended from the Labour Party for working actively with the Tories and then get politely just slide back in?
All right.
Are they back in? Are they back in now?
In the party? No, but they're not being ostracised.
They're hoping that people forget about it.
Let's bear in mind, the largest part at the last council election, the largest party in Aberdeen was the SNP, but the Tories in Aberdeen and the Labour got together to form a coalition to keep the SNP out of power. And then, of course, that didn't quite work because that was horror in some parts of the Labour movement, mostly south of the border. So the Labour Party ones became independents. So they still kept the SNP out of power.
Well, they still talk about them as Labour.
Aye,
on the BBC.
They still share sheep.
Yes, I got that one, Jimmy. Okay, we will move on. So, Mr. Gove has been tweeting support for gorgeous George Gallagher's idea that...
Galloway,
idea that only unionists should be allowed to vote. Oh, sorry, I don't think he went quite that far in any new referendum. Everybody that's ever worn tartan and lives south of the border is to get a vote, apparently.
I noticed that Andrew Neil's taking a few steps back now that Galloway's got involved. Andrew Neil's like, oh, hold it, wait a minute, do not tell me with that brush.
I can,
But it's ridiculous, mate. It's smoke and mirrors. You've got the illusionist in chief, Andrew Neil, and his less than glamorous assistants. They're basically bringing, or they're trying to bring to Scottish politics an ethnic
blood and soil.
planet that just isn't there. It never has been there. And they can take their ethnicity and jam it straight between the cheeks of their keister.
No, it's the old blood and soil stuff that.
I actually think they might get a surprise were they to do it, because I can't think of anybody Scottish that I know who's living and working down south. I can think of one person who wouldn't vote for independence.
Well, I can think of Michael Gove.
He's not really Scottish,
Well,
is he?
two then.
Well, he was adopted, and I mean, I know that people have been adopted. They're going to get angry at what I'm about to say, but there's a lot of.
Would he need to take a DNA test to make sure he was actually Scottish?
Well, he might have been adopted from England, but I don't know. But I am worried about it. Why is he so against Scotland? Maybe he was abused as a child.
Well, I don't know about that.
Just,
I certainly know that he's not Scottish, mate. He's never lived or worked here in decades, and the fact that he was brought up here and moved down south, fine. You've got some affinity to Scotland, but you're not Scottish, as far as I'm concerned, once you've lived and worked in London for 20, 30 years.
Well, let me alert viewers and listeners to the fact that there's a video going around on social media of Michael Gove as a much younger man doing a bit of stand-up. And it is appalling what he says about Scotsmen in London. Absolutely.
Yes, I remember it. Oh, Jimmy's old man must be needing a cup of tea.
Aye. And the article that I saw that you alerted me about the Gove and the Galloway Unity Party, it's not the one I looked at that you alerted me to, was in the Times by Kieran Andrews and Kenny Fackerson. And there's a claim in there that powers over the Constitution are reserved to Westminster, and Boris Johnson insists he will not agree to a second referendum while Prime Minister. I don't know if you noticed that in the last couple of days, Peat Worrier, who's a respected lawyer these days, who lectures in law in Glasgow, says it is not that simple. There are factors in the Constitution that are reserved, but the Constitution per se is not reserved.
Exactly. Well, how do you reserve something that's not codified? You know what I mean?
That's how he summed it up as well.
To say that the Constitution is reserved just gives them a massive leeway, because there's no written Constitution. Therefore, they can just say that's constitutional and we're reserving that.
Is it not slightly differently worded? I don't think it talks about the Constitution. Does it not talk about constitutional matters?
Well, let me refer viewers and listeners to go and look up Peat Worrier's, what he said about it himself. It must have been yesterday. Shouldn't be hard to find. I noticed Andrew Neil, you mentioned it, he's involved in this wee row. Andrew Neil, Danny Alexander, Michael Gove and George Galloway. Andrew Neil's trying to, as you say, trying to back off from this link to George Galloway. And also, Andrew Neil had a spat with somebody who claimed that he used to be editor of the Scotsman, and they were talking about the collapse in sales at the Herald. And Andrew Neil was claiming, I was never the editor, I represented the owner. That's some excuse, isn't it?
He was the editor of the Scotsman.
He was the editor of the Scotsman, and he proudly proclaimed that for a very long time.
That was his job title.
Well, but he represented the Barclay brothers. Now, bear in mind, he does like to pretend that he doesn't have serious interest in the Spectator, the Telegraph. I mean, he's dug in there like the foundation.
Is he not the managing director of the Spectator? Is he not the CEO or something?
He's the publisher. He's listed as publisher in every magazine that comes out. It's a shady ownership, hence the reason that they want Weetabix napper fronting it so that it hides it. But he is definitely, oh come on, he was Murdoch's creature for how many years? He'll take coin off anybody.
I think he must have fallen out with Murdoch, and he went up with the Barclay brothers.
I never have had a problem with him as an interviewer. I find him fairly even-handed, and he's aggressive to everybody. Don't like his politics, But I can't think of many occasions when he's allowed that to get in the way of ripping Tories or the right wing.
You
You
know, you
know,
know,
he's not gentler on them than he is on the left wing. He probably relishes the fight with the left wing more.
you know that I've got a confession to make about Andrew Neil, haven't I, Norrie? At one point, I certainly went out there as the not the Andrew Neil show.
Yes,
So
way back.
I do have a history, shall we say, with Andrew Neil.
I never, as I say, I mean, I hate it when he does that repeat thing he does with people who won't answer a question. But
Yeah,
he's pretty nasty to everybody.
I think he needs to keep things impersonal, because when it gets personal, he's shows his character. He's an absolute shit. I think I don't know if you remember seeing Owen Jones on the programme where it descended into farce.
Well, Owen Jones, to be fair, had made some pretty personal allegations against him.
He had, but Andrew Neil, it just, as I say, it descended into farce. And Andrew Neil is a shit. He's an extreme right-wing shit. And he also has been deeply implicated in a couple of sex scandals over the years that give me the impression that he's a horrific man. I mean, do you remember the name Pamela Bordes? He was up to his lugs in that, and Rupert Murdoch dug him out a hole. Because Murdoch basically bought the story and spiked it.
Aye.
And then went with John Selwyn Gummer with a bloody Chelsea shirt and what have you. Oh, it was horrendous stuff back then.
That was a long time ago, wasn't it? Eh? Look, there's one other point I'd like to bring out on that article by the Times article. It's just the second last paragraph. It refers to a YouGov survey for the Scottish Fabians that claims, what is it claims?
This is the Scottish Fabians that wanted to create rules for a referendum that basically meant you would have to wait at least 10 years to even start talking about it.
Aye.
They claimed in the poll that only 52% of people asked said it was the independence issue distracts from other issues. Yeah, right.
Yeah. You can actually see in the article how they've worded the questions to get the answers that they want. It's so see-through. It's almost beneath YouGov, but then you remember that YouGov's Nadeem Zahawi's pet toy in it, so there's nothing beneath them really.
Absolutely.
Which one's the ex-Labour, the Labour peer? Is that panel based?
I have no idea, mate. Frankly, I look at them all as being unionist nonsense till they show me numbers that I get excited about for 5 minutes and then remember that they're unionist numbers. So
it's always worthwhile having a wee look at Scott Goes Pop. James Kelly, when there are polls comes out, he kind of gives you a quick analysis and a quick background. He doesn't go into them in huge depth, but he'll tell you what if he thinks the questions were loaded.
Yeah,
the weighting, where the weighting was done, and it's always handy to check.
Yeah, he had a wee thing this morning about yesterday's polls. Was it the Comrades one that it was only about 2 or 3 paragraphs, but it was an interesting 2 or 3 paragraphs that kind of took apart a bit of their weighting.
Yeah, what does he sums up? He talks about it, unless there's if the reality of a catastrophic clean break, that's Brexit he's talking about. Yes, we'll stay out in front even after the pandemic subsides. He sums up his analysis of the polls at the moment.
The other thing, which isn't really on this topic, but it's about unionists in Scotland. Apparently there's some academics that think Scotland should count Churchill amongst its heroes. Did you see any of that?
I didn't, but I'd suggest that those same academics maybe take a trip to Glasgow or Dundee and try saying that in the street to people, particularly people of a certain age.
Well, Grousebeater's got a piece up basically listing all the, well, shall we call them home truths about Churchill? Because he was actually in the Liberal Party when he was an MP for Dundee.
Aye.
Before he jumped back to the Tories. But Grousebeater's gone into it in great depth and basically given us good reason not to consider Churchill a hero in
Aye,
Scotland.
it strikes you as remarkable that you ken how much a fan of academia I am, but it does strike you as remarkable that people do get retained tenured jobs and still know absolutely nothing about what they're talking about. If you're trying to tell the people of Dundee or Glasgow that Churchill's some kind of hero, just don't do it in person. Do it, have a Zoom meeting about it, because if you go to Glasgow and tell people Churchill's a hero, you'll get chased out.
Didn't Churchill run some sort of training scheme in Glasgow for tank drivers?
He did, yes. Although people, I do understand that a lot of historians have tried to rewrite history on that particular point, but aye, he did send the tanks in.
Was that the Mary Barber rent strike?
I think it
ended
might be rent strike, mate, in 1917, wasn't it?
Aye.
I think it was 2 years. The rent strike was 2 years before. It was 1919. The tanks were on the streets in Glasgow, not in George Square, by the way. That's not quite true. But don't forget, 1915, Churchill was responsible for the disaster, the Allied disaster. It was a success for the Turks at Gallipoli, which really hurt Australia and New Zealand because there were
a lot of people died. A lot
of Aussie Anzacs, as we were called in those days, died. Also, you could say Churchill was responsible for a large part for the shape of the Cold War. Towards the end by the time they realized they were going to win the war, and they were having these meetings at Yalta, and when Churchill went to the USA in '44 and that, he was so desperate to hang on to the British Empire. The decisions that he made as Prime Minister affected our lives today.
Good old Winnie.
To tell that to the Palestinian people.
There you go.
Anything else on the Gove thing, seeing as I led us astray there, sorry.
Oh, no, well, I'd be interested to see if Lady Macbeth shows her face again. Because Gove doesn't do anything without his missus telling him. So,
well, it's Sarah Vine.
If he's been given more responsibility for how London deals with Scotland, it's interesting in another way in that she's bound to be involved with it, but does it not kind of sideline Alistair Jack? And
he's sidelined. He's sidelined completely. Well, don't, for every time you mention Sarah Vine, I always just think of Murdoch. I mean, as far as I know, she's the direct line to Murdoch.
Does she not write for the Mail?
She does.
She does now, but she's in Murdoch's pocket.
I've been kind of following the Mail front pages. They are really going for Boris these days.
Yeah, well,
they are not very happy at all or supportive of the Tories at the moment.
And what about Bannon getting arrested then? Steve Bannon. Now there's a big thing.
That's interesting.
But of course, he'll get, even if he gets convicted, he'll get pardoned as well if Trump gets back into power.
Well, he better get convicted quick.
Aye.
He'd probably be better just putting his hands up and go to jail now before Trump gets dumped.
He's as well pleading guilty so that he can get a pardon before Joe Biden gets in, because it's bound to a pinch of shite. He'll not get pardoned by Joe Biden.
No, it was quite interesting. There was a bit of a chagrin. Apparently, you know how Trump has been going on about trying to fiddle the postal system before so running the postal system down so that people can't use postal votes to get him out of office. And apparently it was because of the US postal system they discovered where Bannon was hiding on this yacht.
All right.
It's
an interesting approach to stopping voter postal fraud by shutting down the post office so nobody can vote.
Mm.
So if nobody votes, there can't be any fraud.
That's true. That's very, very Trumpian, that statement, though. Maybe they'll send Steve over to Russia, and Putin's got a pot of tea with his name in it.
Well, anyway, as far as we know, there's 5 existing Trump criminal associates. I can say that. I don't have to use the word alleged, because they were all found guilty by federal courts, and they were all given sentences. Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, There was a defense secretary anyway. There's 5 of them altogether, and I think they've all been pardoned by Trump, even though they all got sentenced to jail.
And quite right too.
If that man could invent or force through a get out of jail free card for the Monopoly game for his family, that's exactly what he'd be doing right now.
But
Every single one of them will be investigated when he loses the election, and I hate to think of what they might just turn up.
it's like he thinks America is a monarchy.
Yeah.
You know, it's like he thinks he's the king and he can
Well,
do
yeah.
anything he wants. He doesn't seem to understand how democracy works.
No, he's too stupid to understand how democracy works. He's too thick to understand that he doesn't rule by decree. It's quite frightening.
I know
And
this-
I'm pretty sure there'll be psychologists and psychiatrists writing books about this man for the next 20 years.
Well, I mean, this post office thing, can you imagine if at the start of the election that Trump won, he'd said, my first thing I'm going to do in office is shut down enough of the post office to make it impossible for people to vote by letter. Nobody would have believed it. But incrementally, as he's done all these incredibly damaging things in office, there aren't people on the streets demonstrating about it.
This one kind of defies belief, though. I've no idea. I mean, obviously, he's got a bee in his bonnet that he's going to get robbed because of postal votes. But they should have been talking him down for weeks and weeks. I mean, the US Postal's got something like a 93% approval rating by people in America. So he's only got 7% of folk that might think Donald's got something decent to say when he talks about running down the post office. The rest of the country thinks he's an absolute horse's arse when he's talking about something like that.
And that 7% are pigeon breeders and want to go back to pigeon mail.
Aye, you're probably right.
It's very strange.
Pony Express fans.
Anybody else got anything for?
I wanted just
Friday?
a quick word about Jason Michael Jeggett, also known as. He had an article yesterday which he points out to quite an interesting, illuminate, shall we say, one of the so-called divides within the SNP, or you could say the Yes movement. I could mention another one before I tell you about this one, the fundies as opposed to the gradualists. So there's another group.
Yeah.
They've been around for years. Jason talks about progressive politics and how there's the purists that just want to, it's independence or nothing. We've talked about this before, but I can recommend the article. Jason illuminates, better describes what it is about people that want to, they're talking about the GRA, the changes to trans women or men's identity.
What he's really saying is the fundamentalists are interested in nothing but independence. Nothing's more important.
Well, that's different from the gradualists, but you've got
the gradualists have other political aims.
I disagree with you there, but I can see the linkage, but I disagree with you there. There's a clear difference between the fundamentalists who want to get independence in a hurry and the gradualists who believe bit by bit we'll get there anyway, so let's not rock the boat. But there is also this divide about there are people that are supposedly woke within the party that have come in the party and they won't sacrifice their personal issues that they're determined to get through that are damaging the chances of the independence movement.
Well, the split, in my opinion, isn't between fundamentalists and gradualists. The split is between that third group whose main aim is not independence.
I'm not saying that they're the same thing. There are more than one way to divide up the gaps within the SNP.
Yeah, well, I'm not disagreeing, but the danger for me are the people whose views on independence are second to their belief in whatever it is, trans rights, hate speech, whatever.
We've been aware of that. I can just recommend Jason Michael's article because he illuminates, he explains it rather well, better than I can today.
Yeah, I would unrecommend Jason Michael's article because, again, it was flowery, snobbery, and frankly, I'm tired of listening to bloggers writing about schisms within the SNP and schisms within the Yes movement. You're doing the unionist work for them when you write articles like that.
Jimmy, you've got your head buried in the sand. The division is there. You saying it's not there, or you're annoyed about it, doesn't it get rid of it?
But Stuart,
We're
the
sitting at
division is
57%
irrelevant.
in the polls. The division doesn't matter. I don't care whether you think Peter Murrell and his missus are dividing the movement for whatever reason. The bottom line is we need to get to an election victory and independence, and writing article after article after article telling people that there are splits doesn't help that in any way.
Oh, you're part of the Keep the Heat
No, I'm nothing to do about keep the heat. Win the fucking fight. Didn't sit and argue amongst ourselves over stuff that means absolutely nothing.
I actually think it's irrelevant. I don't think because you're on the two different sides of a GRA argument that you're not going to vote SNP. You know, I mean, the mainstream media and the unionists would love it to split the SNP vote.
Well,
but it's not going to.
That's a suggestion in Jiggett's article that women wouldn't vote SNP because there are pro-GRA candidates standing. I think that's hyperbole. I don't see many women out with the Twitter bubble, which should be treated with the contempt it deserves. I didn't see many women who are going to go, you know what, I will not vote for that SNP candidate, even though I want independence, because she's going to let a gadget in Malawi. I don't think people are going to vote on that manner.
You get very upset about Ian Lawson's article this morning that he had trouble getting up for some reason or other.
I've seen it. I think it's a pretty good article, but again, people are ascribing motives to voters that they think.
But he's not talking about. He's talking about the NEC, and he's saying that he wants the alphabet women. They want to be able to. If he's voting, let's say, if you're voting for who the candidate should be in your constituency and you're an SNP member, he wants to be able to identify the people, in case they're alphabet women, that are standing as candidates.
Well, he can't, because it's against the law.
Well, he suggested a way of asking people.
Yeah, and it's convoluted. It will come out. So no, I'm sorry. Unless, like I would suspect many of us anoraks, I mean, we've worked out who some of them, if not all of them, are, thanks to the various unionist articles supporting them, I would say. You don't vote. I actually, as long as they want independence, I don't swear word care. If they'll fight for independence, I'll give them my vote. Whether they support Salmond or hate Salmond matters not a jot.
It's simpler than that as well, mate. If they are the best candidate to stand, they will win the candidacy. And frankly, if they've been involved in the case and they are standing to be candidates for next year, it will come out because somebody's going to bubble it.
Yeah.
Somebody at the selection meeting, at whatever branch they're standing for, they didn't even need to do it publicly. They just quietly go around, by the way, that's women F, that's woman F, that's woman F. It would go around the meeting, and frankly, they wouldn't win because there'd be enough people out there who, just on that alone, would want them not to be the candidate. It's a massive amount of baggage to take into a job, isn't it?
Yeah, and I do think that is one of the reasons they wanted anonymity, and they want to maintain it because it will impact.
There were nine of them. At the end of the day, half of them were civil servants. So you're talking about 4 or 5 women. You're lucky if 2 of them will be even standing to be candidates for next year, eh?
Yeah, well, we know one of them at least wanted to stand, and Salmond stopped it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And there was probably good reasons for Salmond picking somebody else, and the somebody else, I'm told, was a far better candidate. So if she's been through the process before and been knocked back, there's every chance that she's going to get knocked back again.
It would be, I think, difficult to get through vetting.
Yeah, with this amount of baggage, because they physically, they actually, they ask you the question when you're in vetting: do you have anything that is liable to bring you or the party into disrepute? And frankly, having been involved in such a high-profile case, I think anybody with any amount of decency would have to admit to that.
Well, we'll see. Anything funny to finish with?
I'm fed up with the weather. I'm watching less and less television.
Stuart,
The
look
news
at the weather in Leith.
The news
It's beautiful. Look at it.
I put the telly on, and the news is less and less relevant to what's happening to me and my life in Scotland. The weather forecast, twice I've taken my most fragile flowers indoors because I was warned there was going to be a gale force last night and the night before. Where's this bloody gale?
Well, it was blowing a gale at times last night, mate. You must have been snoozing through it.
Oh, I'm a light sleeper. I go for a pee 4 times a night.
Oh, that's a bit more detail.
Yeah, we need that. Anyway, lads, as you'll notice behind me is Leith's famous secret beach that nobody knows where it is.
Oh, yeah. Did you know they fenced off the secret beach?
Yes, I did.
Bastards.
Well, no wonder. Look at it.
Ah, well, it's too popular, I know.
So social distancing will be required.
I heard there were 1,400 Lithuanians trying to wild camp down there.
There was guys wild camping on the
other end.
Yeah,
by the sewage works.
Yeah, Porty Beach.
I forgot about that. And there was I know a guy with a piano wild camping on Porty Beach. When
that I would have liked to have seen.
That was a row with his ex-wife or something, wasn't he?
Leith, isn't it wonderful? Okay, folks. Thank you, Stuart Lockhead, Jimmy Hatton. I'm Norrie Stewart. Thanks for listening, folks. And we're off tomorrow. So we'll catch up with you on Sunday after all the politics programs.
Bye, guys. Evening all.
Cheers for now. I will be burning this T-shirt shortly.
Oh, well.